This is a review and PPH for Piper.
Yes, fourth review, it looks like, second permanency planning hearing. And the names of our participants, please.
Carson Howitt, lawyer, guardian ad litem.
Nastasia Thomas, counsel for the department.
Leslie Conrad, foster care worker, Fostering Solutions.
Michael McFarland, representing father.
Father Wesley Piper.
Mother Emily Gerber.
Good morning, Honor. Ariel Berger here on behalf of Mother Emily Gerber.
All right, Mr. Howard, I look forward to your report whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I was able to meet with the child in my office on January 22nd, 2025. I was able to observe and play with a variety of toys and have a conversation with his current placement. He's a huge fan of Elmo. He said it multiple times during our visit. He's reaching many developmental milestones, such as walking backwards, building towers, and pointing to things in a book like Elmo. I was very impressed with the placement. They're very invested in Kyler's development and committed to the child's development, committed to get him the help he needs. He still attends early on. The placement also supports the child in visiting with his biological brother, which I thought was cool, and fostering that relationship. So they've seen each other a handful of times and continue to seek out opportunities to do so. The child is bonded with his placement. I witnessed them referring to them as mom and dad, and this is brings me to another point that there's some confusion with this child. He refers to his placement as mom and dad. He refers to mom and dad as mom and dad, and just would like to see some permanency and stability go for this child's life moving forward. There's still concerns with the parents' lack of stability with housing, substance abuse, and financial stability. But ultimately, the child's needs are being met in the current placement, and it's in his best interest to stay there. No determination was made to the child's wishes due to his age.
Thank you. Witness testimony today, Ms. Thomas.
Your Honor, I'm going to call Ms. Conrad today. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Conrad, come on up for a
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Conrad. Okay. Before us today, you have provided a court report that includes a cover sheet, proof of service, the report itself, case service plans for the parents, counseling progress notes for Mr. Piper in November, December, Ms. Gerber's forensic fluid drug screens, and then a couple of screenshots for reported work, and then a prescription for Ms. Gerber. Other than
Correct.
the documents that you have listed on that cover sheet, are there any that you have circulated since filing this packet?
I have not circulated since filing. However, this morning I did receive an additional forensic fluid screen result for Ms. Gerber and a January counseling report for Mr. Piper. So I have those physically with me today. They just came in this morning before I walked out the door.
Okay. So as it relates to updates and modifications to your report, are there any that you would like to put on the record at this time?
There would be one additional forensic fluids drug screen collected on 1/23/2025 for Ms. Gerber that is positive for THC and for Suboxone. That would be added to the report. And Mr. Piper's therapist at Dimensions of Wellness stated that in January he attended 3 sessions with her and that he was engaged actively during each session and continues to work towards his goals.
Okay. For the current or the new screen that is not necessarily part of your written report right now, are there any concerns about the THC or Suboxone?
No, the levels on this newest screen are consistent with many of the other screens in the past. There's not a large number for the Suboxone like there was the screen previously.
But there is a valid prescription for that, correct?
Yes,
And as it relates to, I guess, your casework, you are fairly new to the case. Is that fair to say?
correct. Beginning of December, the case transferred to Fostering Solutions.
In the last couple of months, and also, I guess, since reviewing Ms. Skibinski, the prior foster care workers note, how would you describe the parents, each parent's level of compliance with and benefit from the case service plan?
There's some level of compliance for both parents in some areas. The benefit shown from compliance seems to be where we are stagnant, where it appears as if it's been sort of the same report the last few hearings, in that perhaps there is engagement in some services. There may even be a little bit more engagement, especially on Mr. Piper's part, but there continue to be the same large barriers that have been existent since the time of removal, which would be financial instability, housing instability, and continued substance abuse from Ms. Gerber.
During this review period, your report indicates that there were, I believe, 2 positive screens for Ms. Gerber. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And when we, and I guess, just can you confirm, in your opinion, if she's being marked, or how do I want to say this? What positive means, right? Because today's screen that you got back was THC and Suboxone, but there's necessarily no concern with that because of the prescription. So there are 2 that you noted, though. And what was your concern with those?
Right, so there are 2 screens where there is a positive for an opioid of some sort. One was hydrocodone and one was oxycodone, both of which Ms. Gerber, when asked about it, admitted to and talked openly about having a relapse and using pill form of opiates. And then there's a 3rd screen that is not positive for, is only positive for THC and Suboxone, which she has a valid prescription for. However, the level of Suboxone is more than 1,000 when it typically runs between 3 and 20. So when I discussed that with her substance abuse therapist, there was concern on the therapist's part that there could be abuse of the Suboxone also happening right now while she's having some relapse concerns.
And this therapist, I believe there is a note in your report. Is it the same therapist that is concerned about the lack of engagement during January?
Yes, the quote that she stated was that progress in treatment is impaired by lack of attendance. I believe those were the words, something to that effect. Quoted it in the report.
Okay. And I believe as it relates to Ms. Gerber, your report also indicates that she was incarcerated very briefly on a charge that was, or an alleged crime from, I believe it was August or sometime in the summer. Do you have any updates on what's going on with that case?
She just confirmed today that she has a court hearing tomorrow in district court here in Lenawee County for a pretrial. In that case, she is being charged with embezzlement from an arrest that occurred while she was working at 7-Eleven. Or from an incident that occurred while she was working at 7-Eleven.
And as relates to Mr. Piper, you mentioned earlier in your testimony that there's been an increase in compliance with services. Can you just briefly summarize some of the services that he's more recently engaged with?
So there's more consistent attendance with individual counseling for Mr. Piper. And he is open and engages with the therapist while he's there. That appears to be an improvement for him. However, then there was a lack of compliance in other areas that had previously had some compliance. There were no PBTs conducted during this report period. And then there was discussion at the November court hearing from the notes that I read regarding the kind of codependency issues within the marriage regarding substance abuse for both of them, and that marital counseling was very important for them to begin and engage in, and neither began that until January following that November court hearing. So we had 2 sessions since it was discussed here in November. He did provide screenshots of what he reports as income for the months of November, December, and January. There's no way to confirm that it's income, but it appears as if it is payment for work being done. So he has maintained some income into the household.
At the last hearing, the court sort of just noted that perhaps PBTs are not as necessary if dad is being open with his use and sort of addressing that. Do you believe that he's making any progress in addressing alcohol use and his history there with that?
There have been no parenting time observations that have indicated anyone that supervises parenting time has thought he's been under the influence during parenting time. That has not been a concern. And also his individual therapist talks about the fact that he is working on substance abuse treatment goals actively when he is meeting with her.
And speaking of parenting time, can you just briefly summarize how that's going, if the parents are meeting expectations, and any progress in expanding that, or just wanting to keep it where it is?
Sure, yeah, consistency is there for parenting time. The parents both attend regularly. They are not late. They bring the items that are needed to care for him while they are there. They are attentive to the child. There are no concerns noted regarding their direct care of Kyler while spending supervised, structured time with him. There's also no history of them missing visits or appearing late for visits. That is not a concern of the agencies at this time.
I think in the past we've discussed moving towards unsupervised parenting time for the family. Do you have an opinion on that at this time?
Well, Ms. Gerber just self-reported, admitted to a relapse in her substance use, and also talked about the fact that she, while struggling with that prior to and while engaging in the relapse, was not comfortable talking to her husband about those issues and did not want him to know about it. So there are concerns about whether or not there could be substance use going on that maybe both parents would not be aware of, that could be a risk to the child currently. We would not recommend unsupervised.
And some of the other concerns in the past have also been whether the parents have valid licenses. Do you know if there's any update on that?
I have not been given an update as to whether either has obtained their driver's license in this report period, no.
Okay. And have you, and I know that historically the issue of housing and where unsupervised parenting time would take place has also been a concern. Have you observed their housing and whether that's appropriate or not?
I have not physically been inside of the home in this report period. I was invited last week by Ms. Gerber and Mr. Piper. They said they could stop by this week. The issue is that it is a shared home that they rent one room of, and the living space is shared by numerous other people who can change at any given time based on the landlord's decision of who lives there and who doesn't. And maintaining a level of safety and also not knowing who might be in the home would be impossible.
Based on your review of the case and the current status of it, do you believe that there has been sufficient progress to continue towards the goal of reunification?
So at 12 months in, we are required to really look at a case and all of its particulars to determine what is in the child's best interest permanency wise. And because of Kyler's young age, because of the history of multiple prior terminations, and for mother and father being fully aware of those prior terminations and removals before having this child with mother. And then the continued lack of progress in the most significant barriers to reunification, the agency believes that it is time to look at a goal change for the child of adoption versus reunification.
In the past, the court has,
I'm sorry.
I'll let you finish your thought. Please continue.
It does not appear that the barriers that remain that have been there since the moment of removal are barriers that can be removed in a reasonable amount of time that would and then be monitored and maintained for a reasonable amount of time to ensure safety. We're talking about so many more months of care for this child that would not be in his best interest at his young age.
And one of the things I believe the course mentioned in the past is also to consider alternatives to adoption for him. Is the child still with a fictive kin caregiver?
Yes.
And have there been any discussions about whether like a guardianship of some form would be appropriate, whether they'd be willing to do that, and whether the caregivers would be willing to accept that appointment, and whether that would serve the child's best interest?
The caregivers would prefer the legal stability of an adoption versus a guardianship, but also are wanting to provide stability and predictability and permanence for Kyler, and will do whatever is required or asked of them to be able to do that. They would not refuse permanence through a guardianship if that's what the court decided, but they do prefer the idea of the legal permanency because he has so many years left of his childhood of adoption.
In generally speaking, what is the hierarchy, I guess, of permanency goals for children?
The most permanent and most stable would, well, it depends on which, would be, if you're talking about adoption versus guardianship, adoption is the most stable and permanency plan for a child. Guardianship is a little more fluid in that it could be altered at some point during the child's childhood if there were significant amounts of progress made by the legal parents, and a court decided that perhaps enough had been accomplished that maybe the child could reside with his legal parents again down the road. There are a lot of years left of this little guy's childhood, and that seems the general consensus is that's a lot of years to have a little bit of a question mark regarding permanency and stability for him and the caregivers to tolerate.
And if the agency is looking at adoption as a potential permanency goal for this little one, do you have any opinion as to whether the current caregivers would continue to support relationships with extended family members?
That discussion has taken place multiple months in a row. with the previous caregiver or foster care worker and with me. And the caregivers state that they have a desire for Kyler to know his birth family, both his parents and some extended family members who are already a part of his life. And they do not wish to extinguish that. They don't want to pretend as if he doesn't have a family, to whom he was birthed. So they state that their desire is to help him maintain relationships dependent on the functioning level of the parents at the time and the safety level of the parents at the time. His paternal grandmother has a relationship with him, and she helps supervise visits on a regular basis. And that relationship, the current caregivers are very adamant they would like to maintain for him. They feel that is a safe grandmother relationship to maintain for him.
Is there anything else from your knowledge of the case that you would like the court to be aware of?
So we are actively providing efforts towards reunification. We understand the importance of assisting families with that goal, and will continue to do so. However, it is also a point in time where looking at the amount of work left to be done, if it can be done, if the parents can reduce these barriers, the amount of time it would take, and then the amount of time it would take to monitor the maintenance of the reduction of those barriers is just too great of an amount of period of time for this child to wait through, in our opinion. The case service plan has been in place for many, many months. Supports have been in place. Assistance has been provided. The parents have known what needs to be done. Still has not been accomplished.
And I do have one follow-up question just regarding the current placement. I believe it is everyone's understanding that the current placement sort of is this grandfathered in regarding policy. So they would not necessarily need to be licensed to be eligible to provide adoption. Is that correct?
They would not need to be licensed to provide adoption. They would need to be licensed to provide a subsidized guardianship, which they would require. They would require financial assistance, I believe. So, yeah, those would be the two differences, yes.
And is there any interest of them becoming, do they have any interest to the best of your knowledge of becoming licensed?
They have said they would not hesitate to do so if necessary. They will absolutely follow through with it. If the court decides that guardianship is the best option for this child, they would follow through with the licensing process. And from what I know of them to date, they would do so efficiently and quickly.
Thank you. With that, Your Honor, I have no further questions of Ms. Conrad and would move to admit the court report with its attachments.
No objections.
No
No
objection.
objections.
Thank you. They are received. Questions for this witness, Ms. Berger?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. McCrell?
The current placement, if there were to be an adoption, do they need additional funds or not?
They would qualify for adoption subsidy because of the child's age.
Well, that wasn't my question. My question was, do they need additional funds?
I do not have an answer for you on that. They have not submitted a, full financial worksheet at this time.
My understanding is that the parents are bringing appropriate food, toys, and everything that's necessary for the child during parenting time, correct?
That is correct.
And the income figures my client has provided are sufficient income in your point of view, correct?
Sufficient, it is an income. Yes, I'm not questioning whether that's a valid income. That is correct.
Is that a sufficient income? That's what I'm asking.
Well, they have been unable to secure safe, adequate housing to date partially because of their financial situation. So it is not sufficient to obtain safe, adequate housing for them and the child.
You would agree, though, that they're not, if they were to secure well, I guess. Child's how old now?
18 months.
So couldn't the child be sleeping in a bed, a crib in their current housing situation?
He could be sleeping in a crib, yes, but the current housing situation, there is no way to monitor the background of the individuals that the landlord of their housing unit allows to share the same living space as the parents and the child.
There are hundreds of parents in Lenawee County in this same situation, and CPS doesn't investigate those, right?
Correct, but
Your Honor,
part
I'm gonna object to that question, Your Honor. It's argumentative, conclusory in its statement, and Ms. Conrad also does not work for CPS.
Any response?
I'll withdraw, I think. Well, why does their particular situation need to be monitored as far as, let me ask, have you run and see if there's anybody with a sexual registry in the neighborhood? I know there are apps for that. Have you done that?
no,
Have you asked the landlord who is living in the apartment?
no.
So there could be suitable people in the apartment right now, but you just haven't asked, right?
Correct, because that could change within 24 hours. The landlord could have someone move out and bring in a new tenant that shares the living space with them and would not have any obligation to let me know who the person is or what their background clearances look
Have you
like.
asked the landlord or my clients how often that does actually happen?
Well, yeah, I spoke with Ms. Gerber about the fact that sometimes there are people that live there, sometimes there are not. Right now, it's kind of a low number living with them, but she also talked about how there have been people that live with them that steal from them and that they didn't feel safe with and that have caused loss of items and money from them. And so there's not a controlled enough environment to ensure child safety.
And I've asked my client if he would like to have considered unsupervised visits if it's without the mother. Got warmer weather coming up and parks and maybe going to McDonald's or things like that. I didn't hear you express an opinion about my client not having unsupervised. What are your thoughts?
Well, that is something that could be explored. There would need to be, when he left here in November, following the hearing, part of his case service plan still stated that he was to submit to PBTs prior to parenting time. He has not done that since he left here in November. So there's no way to prove that he is clean. There have been no concerns during parenting time, but there's no way to prove it.
But your concerns are not to the level that you asked for contempt of court against them for not submitting to PBTs, correct?
Correct. Instead, we have stated it appears as if compliance with the case service plan is a concern. After 12 months in care, we would like to change the goal to adoption.
And have you done random visits at the house?
I have not gone inside. I've stopped to bring them dial-a-ride tokens. I met with Emily one time in the driveway of the home, but I have not gone inside. No.
Well, you've met with my client unscheduled, correct?
Yes,
And he's not exhibited any signs that he had consumed alcohol, correct?
correct.
And none of the visitations, are there any concerns that he's been consuming alcohol, correct?
Correct.
My client's expressing, relating to me that he had requested a gas card, since mother had used it up and he needed it to take PBTs and he never received one. Do you happen to recall that conversation?
Yes, we've had conversations about this because they were given $40 on a Visa gift card for PBTs only, which are $2 a piece. And so if we're talking about the family having sufficient income right now, $2 twice a week should be able to be taken care of. They were given a $40 Visa gift card to last for many, many PBTs. It was used incorrectly for something else. So they no longer had that. I did not have another card to give them so quickly after that was already used up. I did in fact give them a fuel card, and we talked about the fact that use this for fuel in your vehicle and then use your income for the PBTs. I didn't have another Visa card to give them. I did have a gas card to give them. So they received a gas card from me to supplement in that way. He still did not attend. He did recently and he did very recently attend and tried to do one last week, I believe. And he was no longer in the system because it had been so many days, so many consecutive days of no registry at the kiosk.
What does he need to do to then reactivate the PBT?
So I called and talked to the sheriff's department and I texted him this morning that he just needs to, they reset him in the system. He needs to go back, put his PIN in, re-register, and it should be good to go.
So you had a PBT this morning, right?
I do not know if he did yet today.
You said you tested him this morning. What do you mean?
No, I texted.
Oh, texted. I'm
Sorry, yes, I
Okay.
messaged him this morning to let him know
I understand.
it's been resolved. Yes,
Your concern isn't so much whether they have a driver's license, but whether they're able to get to scheduled events, correct?
correct.
Have they been able to get, has my client been able to get to scheduled events?
Some of them, yes, not all of them.
Has he indicated that he was working at some of them?
Potentially, yeah, potentially, but yes, so he was able to attend well child exam and dental exam. He attends parenting time. He did not attend early on appointments in December and January for the child. And did not attend an urgent care visit that the child went to.
He gave an explanation.
Transportation, vehicle breakdown, I believe, for both of the, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in January, early on, was because of a breakdown of their vehicle. December may have been a work conflict, a job conflict. I don't know about the urgent care necessarily.
Is there a possibility that the last worker may have written down the wrong date and provided that to my client?
That could be a possibility. I believe the caregiver provides and the information to them as well, though. When she schedules something, I believe she texts the parents.
Lastly, if it comes down to it, what would your opinion about separate planning? If my client were to proceed on his own path without mother, who seemed to have had some relapses and other issues, would you be willing to considering him on an independent path for unification?
There would have to be some significant black and white plans in place that would happen pretty quickly because this child has already been in care for 12 months. Housing is still a concern, stable finances is still a concern, and the kind of codependency that has been spoken about between the two would not disappear just because they may not be living together. So that would be a concern that would need to kind of be worked through, that he would be able to maintain the child's safety from mother if he was no longer with mother.
Nothing further.
Any questions?
No,
Mr.
Your
Howard?
Honor.
Any redirect?
Ms. Conrad, for Mr. Piper, the income that he sent you on those screenshots, did you happen to run any quick math on that?
Did add it up-ish in the report, yes. So these are all unverified numbers. I don't have verification from these individuals that they're shown on these screenshots that they are in fact paying them for a service. But what I added up approximately was that for November, there was approximately $1,000. December was approximately $1,300. In January, it was approximately $1,100. That is not every single, there were, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You finish your thought.
There were a few screenshots that I could not factor in that, it did not show who it was to, it didn't even show that it was to Mr. Piper or Ms. Gerber. It didn't show what it was for. It was just a name and a dollar amount. So it's very hard to consider that income. But those are the approximate numbers. They do continue to ask for assistance through gas cards and through Visa cards and dial-a-ride tokens. So they're continuing to ask for assistance financially.
Have you just, have the parents or have they worked with budgeting and discussing how to manage finances that are coming through?
We have not spent time in this reporting period since I met them in December. We have not spent time on budgeting information. No, I know that that was something that they were supposed to be kind of turning in regularly from the previous workers' reports and notes were some kind of written down budgeting plans. There were larger issues that I was kind of focusing on in this report period.
Have you discussed with the parents their relationship and the concerns you may have about it?
I spoke with Ms. Gerber about it because we met privately regarding her positive drug screens. She did not want to discuss those in front of her husband. So we met privately about those and we talked about the fact that she had not used the coping skills that the two of them had been taught in their counseling, which was to discuss these things with one another, use one another as a support. She also talked about the kind of that the relationship had not felt real healthy recently, and that there's been a lot of anger and resentment regarding the foster care case, and she didn't want him to be disappointed in her for using, and she also was afraid he'd be angry with her. So I did not speak with him about that, but I did hear that from Ms. Gerber.
And do you happen to know the goals that they're working on in the joint therapy sessions?
So I have not gotten a written report from their therapist regarding their marital counseling, but they did meet with their marital therapist very recently and did openly discuss Emily's use in December and January. And they're going to, so they as a group talked about that and is now out in the open, and they are going to be working on how to, she said they're going to be working on how to eliminate secrets in the relationship and be able to be open with one another when there's a feeling of wanting to use to potentially eliminate relapses.
Thank you. With that, I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any other questions for this witness, Ms. Berger?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Mr. McFarland?
No, thank you.
Mr. Howard?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you for your testimony. May I return your seat. Any other witnesses today, Ms. Thomas?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Berger?
Ms. Gerber, do you want to testify today?
No, at the moment, no.
Okay. No witnesses, Your Honor.
My client does not wish to testify either.
Mr. Howard, anyone you think we should hear from?
No, Your Honor.
Very well. Comments in closing, beginning with Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Your Honor. At the last hearing on November 12th, we essentially had a very similar hearing. There hasn't been a lot that has changed since then. And as court noted, it had been at that point 9-10 months of case service plan planning done with this family, services being offered to them. And those main barriers, as Ms. Conrad stated today, were also present then. And we were warned that we would really need to look at the permanency options for this kiddo. I think that Ms. Conrad has done a wonderful job in understanding the barriers that are present for this family, the barriers for unification, and the areas of need for this family. And I am glad that Ms. Gerber, she often presents herself to us with self-awareness and is often able to identify her areas of need as well. And I'm glad that she's able to do that with Ms. Conrad, and I'm hopeful for them. But at this point in time, given the outstanding barriers, and even it's not just about income, it's not just about housing, it's not just about transportation, it's about all of these issues that are current and present, and really were the reason that the child came into care was for this lack of care for the kiddo and neglect. And mom substance abuse is a long-standing concern, as this court is aware. I mean, this case number is a 2020 case number. And this is, I want to say, the third or fourth child that we've had this court need to take jurisdiction over. And so at this time, Your Honor, given all of the barriers, given the limited progress, given the time that it would be required to demonstrate stability and safety for this kiddo, I think that at this time it is appropriate to formally shift the goal to adoption. You know, this court is always interested in maintaining that familial bond and relationship. And it seems that with the current caregivers, adoption really provides both them and the child, and that's who the focus is on, the child, though, this permanency that's not as malleable. It is firm, and the child would also continue to be supported in maintaining relationships with the child's biological family, which I think is a really nice thing as well, but without the concerns of, am I going to have to move one day? How long can my parents stay on track before that's at risk? So I really think that those things are present in this case. And so we are asking the court to consider adoption as the primary goal for this kiddo. Thank you.
Comments, Ms. Berger?
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, we are requesting a little bit more time before there is a goal change in this case. As we all know, sobriety is not linear, and my client has been honest with the court, with the caseworkers, and most of the time with herself during the pendency of this case, and what she struggles with and what she needs to work on. So at this time, we are asking for more time for her to accomplish those goals, to be able to work on things like substance use, you know, resolving some of her pending criminal matters, and working towards a goal of independent housing, or rather housing separate from other families. So at this time, Judge, we would just ask for another reporting period without that goal change, to give my client a little bit more time to show the court that she is able to do these things that are being requested of her in her case service plan. Thank you.
Mr. McFarland?
Yeah, we're asking that the court consider a concurrent goal of reunification. And although we don't wish to have adoption as a goal, but the court intends to consider that the court would also consider concurrent goal. I know right now we're looking at them as a couple, but when we separate them as a couple, mom really hasn't been honest. She didn't tell her husband that she's back using, so they could address that as a couple. He's the one with the income. There's not been concerns with him not being sober at his visits. He is, once again, on the path for PBT, as testified. He may need to make a difficult decision whether he can do this as a team, as a married couple, or whether he's going to pursue this individually. But he's asking the court also to consider him having visits separately and unsupervised, because there haven't been those concerns with him, Your Honor. So we're asking for one more reporting period. We're not yet at 14 months. Thank you.
Thank you. The court sorry, Mr. Howitt. I almost skipped.
Yes, so I would be fully support with the agency and requesting the goal change to adoption. I think, this case has been open for 12 months and there's been minimal progress made in those key areas that Ms. Conrad had identified. I think the child is at a point in his life where he just needs stability and permanency and needs to know, what his future is really gonna look like. So fully support the goal change to adoption.
Thank you. Court finds all interested parties were given notice for purposes of today's hearing, which was a review hearing as well as a permanency planning hearing. At the last hearing, which was also a review hearing and a permanency planning hearing, the parents were signaled that significant progress needed to be made in very base pivotal areas in order to continue to have the opportunity to work on towards reunification. Goal was changed to a goal of reunification, adoption, and juvenile guardianship, and was requested to be explored in the next review. Ms. Conrad has certainly done that and testified very well about the investigation into the alternative of juvenile guardianship for this family, considering the bond between the child and the parents, as well as the bond between the child and his biological family. However, I do see that progress has not been made in very significant areas. Both parents are still in the same living arrangement, which is not appropriate for the child. Neither has been able to show regular income to the extent that they'd be able to change that circumstance. Neither has been able to secure a driver's license to safely transport themselves or other people and continue to utilize snow removal and scrap collection as the primary method of income to support themselves, even though neither really has a driver's license. And I appreciate that they may involve other people, but certainly I know there's been testimony in prior hearings as well of them driving essentially without having accomplished getting a hold of a driver's license, which obviously poses a risk as it relates to themselves and the child. So it's some of those basic things that are an issue. There is also the dynamics of their relationship that Ms. Conrad discussed today. There was a referral made for joint counseling in November, and that didn't happen until just a couple of weeks before today's hearing. Individual counseling has been something that Mr. Piper was very resistant to. He's recently done that, but only a couple of sessions. Ms. Gerber has struggled mightily in the last report period, having a couple of relapses and not utilizing individual counseling or some of the resources that she needs. And it's a pivotal time in the case. The child has been removed from their care since 2/6 of 2024, and this is a 2020 case. Mr. Wesley was a support for Ms. Gerber in the prior case that we had, in the same dynamics in their relationship presented in that case as they do here. All of the areas identified as a risk of harm in reuniting this couple with their son continue to persist. And there does not appear to be any manageable period of time to allow them to continue on this particular path. I looked at not just visitation, but also attendance at appointments for the child. And some of those appointments the parents were able to make and others they were not. But when I look at a juvenile guardianship rather than adoption, number one, obviously it has to do with whether or not the child is with family, which this is a fictive can arrangement. At the request initially of Ms. Emily Gerber, but that is not technically family. This person is making efforts to provide a relationship between this child and his biological family, which is great. And it's frankly something that we would expect them to do and act in the best interest of this child as if they were the adopted parents, to decide whether or not to allow this child to see biological family would be something that they would be allowed to do. The parents are visiting with the child and providing during the visits, it sounds like, which is good. But essentially, if I were to be looking at a juvenile guardianship, it would just to be able to continue to allow those visits, which continue to need to be supervised. I do not agree that the parents should be visiting separately or unsupervised, given the lack of progress, number one, in some of the areas like relationship dynamics, but there's also the transportation issue. I don't want them risking getting arrested in order to try to meet somewhere else, where there's no supervision for the child. For example, Ms. Gerber is obviously struggling with relapse. Mr. Piper is not engaged in his services to make sure that the dynamics associated with his interactions with his child are free of those power and control dynamics that have been observed and reported on by Ms. Conrad, as well as the worker that was in charge of the case at the last outset. And I am changing the goal to adoption for all of the reasons that were expressed today by our caseworker. We have the support of the LGAL in that. I cannot unfortunately rule out adoption on behalf of legal guardianship for the reasons that I've discussed. This child is young, he needs permanency. Parents have had, frankly, more than twice the amount of time that was offered to them at the outset of this case, given that the issues were well understood and identified. So adoption is the safest and most permanent and secure goal for this child. He needs to remain in the placement where he's doing well. And the department is ordered to file that petition for termination within the next 28 days. We'll have our next review hearing date on April 28th at 10:30. That's also a Monday. If the petition is timely filed and served, I will consolidate that review with the request for termination of parental rights, as well as another permanency planning hearing, in order to ensure that those permanency planning hearings continue to happen. The agency has met their obligations to provide reunification services in this case, and that it does include the visitation. I am directing that the visitation may be reduced to weekly or bi-weekly at the discretion of the foster care caseworker. Understanding that once that petition for termination of parental rights is filed, that may potentially alter that period of time again. But for now, I'll leave it within the discretion of Ms. Conrad to decide how often that will be occurring. Understanding that it doesn't really seem to be posing a risk of harm to the child at this point, other than maybe with regard to some confusion about who will be providing his stability in the future. But until I hear something that increases that risk or provides a risk of harm as it relates to the parent's behavior during parenting time, or any risk of flight, which are the other real reasons that we would suspend it, I'm going to leave it in place. April 28th at 10:30 in the morning, again, is when our next hearing will be, potentially also consolidated with that termination for parental rights. The order will contain all of the rest of the findings and continue the case moving forward. Unless there's any questions, that's all for today.
Question, you mean that may be the termination trial date? Is that what I'm understanding, Your Honor?
Yes,
Thank you.
if the petition is timely filed.
And
I'll have the
exchanging
order for-
exhibits, do we need a pretrial, or the court will say exchange witnesses and exhibits by 7 days prior or something like that?
If there's going to be unexpected witnesses or exhibits, please have those filed no less than 14 days ahead of time.
Fair enough.
But it's consolidated with the regular review, so I wouldn't expect there to be extraordinary exhibits in a case where this is supplemental petition.
Thank you.
All right, I'll have the order for you in a few minutes. Thank you. That's all for today.